Give us your soul and join the Legion.
We are talking Ghost Board from 2026. And this is a Thai movie that seems to be a sort of mix-up of Stranger Things and The Evil Dead. It seems certainly influenced by those two properties, in particular Stranger Things. So what's the story? Well, it focuses on four young teenagers who all of whom are outcasts. Three of which are kind of really into board games and things like this and play a Dungeons and Dragons or a royalty-free version of Dungeons and Dragons. And, you know, they end up kind of getting in trouble and have to go to this sort of temple to kind of clean it up. And there's this other girl there that's got to do the same thing. And while they're cleaning up, they find like a seemingly antique board game, and inevitably they start playing it, but this is actually a sort of possessed, well, ghost board that summons a variety of supernatural entities to attack these four individuals, and they've got to try and finish the game to ultimately get to the end of it to win. Along the way, one of the kids' older sister turns up and ends up getting possessed, and shenanigans happen. What all happened in the movie? You'll have to watch it and find out. So, let's discuss. Alright, so let's talk about what works in this movie's favour. If variety is the spice of your life, you may want to check it out, because one thing that this movie does have is a sort of revolving door of supernatural antagonists. We've got everything from a headless warrior to demon bats to a one-legged ghost to demonic possession. So there's quite a lot kind of going on, and it almost plays a little bit like an anthology where we have a variety of things pop up in segments. Because each turn of the game is a different kind of threat. And there's kind of things that will seem, you know, familiar. For example, one sequence has this sort of possessed trees a la Evil Dead, and we have a bit of chainsaw action kind of going on. So the influences from Western kind of horror and stuff is certainly there. It is a Thai movie. I'm not sure anyone who I'm not going to try and pronounce anyone's names who is involved in this, or directors or cast or anything. But it's clearly still influenced by Western horror, but still has elements that tie into kind of Thai mythology and things like that. So, you know, it's an interesting mix of West and East to a large degree. Our young cast, I've got to say, are quite likeable. You know, they're very much of the ilk of the outcasts, the kind of the loser club, so to speak. So if you're a fan of Stranger Things or the It movies and stuff, or book, then again it has that sort of element to it. Young kind of outcast teenagers kind of having to band together to try and fight this kind of existential evil, which is just kind of quite fun. The effects are mixed, and we're going to talk about it again, but there are a couple here and there that I think are pretty good. Our Headless Warrior is pretty good. There's some use of practical effects here and there that I do think make for kind of some quite fun sequences. And, you know, the movie really, because it has these stages, there's always something else around the corner. So I do think the movie's a little long, but I would say it's spaced out relatively well with kind of like set pieces that are happening, you know, every sort of 20 minutes or so, really, because that's how it goes along. Then we have this other element where they get picked up by the police and stuff, so there's some complications to the proceedings. Where this movie doesn't kind of quite work, and I've hinted at a couple of things already, but I think it's possibly a little long. It runs about 2 hours. It didn't really need to be, I think, 2 hours. I've got to be honest with you. You know, I was kind of getting a little bit impatient with it. Maybe I've just been kind of conditioned to, you know, watch movies to that kind of that 90-minute mark. But the movie's plot wasn't exactly complicated. It's a relatively sort of basic in regards to a narrative, so it's not complicated, but it just feels a little stretched out at times, and I think it could have had a little more. I mean, again, maybe this is more of a, because it's coming from, you know, Thailand, the movie's maybe longer, but in its current form it just felt a little bit overstretched. The effects, which I think is probably going to be the thing that most people will complain about. There are a handful of effects that I think are good, but they use CGI a lot in this movie, and it looks like CGI from 20 years ago. Like, really. Some of the kind of these ghostly antagonists, particularly the first one, is terrible CGI, and it looks like PlayStation 2 era graphics. It really does. And as such is a complete sort of disillusion of any type of immersion that you might have, because it stands out. I mean, it looks like Sci-Fi Channel, you know, CGI a la 2005. That's basically what it kind of looks like here. It's pretty bad at times. Also, there are some sequences that I feel were unnecessarily sort of like CGI. For example, we have like a CGI dice roll, and it's like, well, how hard would it have been to just film a dice? And then we got the sequence of our headless horseman. He's kind of carrying around this like severed head, and the actual body bit looks right, but there's like, they could have made this like a CGI head, and it's like, surely you could have just made a prosthetic head, you know, or you know. So it seems to be like they've relied a little bit too much on sort of CGI, and the CGI that we get is largely pretty poor. I think the movie's tone was a little bit uneven at times, because the movie does kind of oscillate between the kind of the tone of like a more younger person friendly Stranger Things style sort of adventure, but then the scenes with the possessed sister are straight out of the kind of the more modern Evil Dead films. Maybe not quite as gory as them, but that's that kind of style of tone, really. Which is, you know, I quite enjoyed being, you know, I kind of like both those properties. But I think if you're wanting to watch this, it's sort of a younger person, there are elements here that I think fit that. But then there's also some kind of more like adult sort of sections and stuff as well. I would also say I think the movie's mythology is a little bit like confused, or not particularly fleshed out. So I get that these kind of four kids are the ones that end up playing this game, so they're the ones that have to kind of like roll the dice. Okay, fine. So how is it affecting other people? Because we have the sister turns up, the older sister, and she gets possessed. I think, well, she was nothing to do with the original kind of game. How is she getting possessed? And then we learn that each turn is a different ghostly antagonist, but the sister is still possessed from like one of the turns. To me, it's not quite clear about the kind of the rules that this movie kind of sets up. You know, we have this in the police station, this kind of headless warrior turns up, and I think he's there to kill the kids, but then he ends up he sort of tackles the police first of all and stuff. So again, it's just a little bit like, you know, what's the rules here? Overall, it's a kind of, if you've got a little bit of patience for it, I think it's an enjoyable movie. It is flawed. I think, you know, the visual effects do let it down, and some of the effects I think could have been pulled back, like these big like red sky beams and stuff like that. Didn't need to do all that. It was a little bit over the top at times. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? If you have, let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Well, that was spooky. For more of that, subscribe to the Legion.